Hey folks, this is Kelani. If you haven't heard by now, the release date for patch 8.0, that's the pre-patch for Battle for Azeroth, is set for July 17th. We have actual confirmation now, so no more guessing from random calendar dates and previous pre-patch windows. The Battle for Azeroth will finally start ramping up on July 17th. I hope you all have your Mage Tower appearances. If not, you have just a few more days to get your hands on any you're interested in, and make sure everything else on your checklist is done and dusted. We're full speed ahead at this point. A new expansion means new and exciting content and game systems, but also the end of some older game systems that we've been playing with for quite a while now. A few of them have been around since vanilla, while others were introduced in Legion. We'll be saying goodbye to the legendary system as we knew it in Legion, lots of legendaries and lots of RNG, and your current legendaries will only work for about half of the leveling process. As soon as you hit level 116, your legendaries will become just another stat stick. That's not to say we won't see any legendaries at all in Battle for Azeroth. The dev team has talked about maybe introducing something later down the line, but if they did pop another legendary into the game, it would be much more similar to the older legendaries, something very special for very specific classes, instead of everyone having 12 to choose from. We'll also be saying goodbye to set bonuses from raids. This one was quite a surprise when it was first announced. Taking away set bonuses removes one of the advantages that raid gear always had over dungeon gear. That being said, some of the set bonuses were becoming a little uninspired or boring for some classes. And then of course we're losing artifact traits and abilities, for the most part anyway. Some abilities have been made baseline, others are being made talents. Some traits will be lost while others will also be baked in. The main thing we're losing from the artifact system isn't really the bonuses or traits themselves, but a character progression system which allows us to pick and choose which bonuses and traits to get, and it was something we could work towards every day. So losing those systems will leave a pretty sizable hole in terms of both character progression and powerful rewards. To fill that hole we have the new artifact amulet, the Heart of Azeroth, and the new Azurite armor system. It provides us with another artifact power grind that we can work on every day. We have several traits we can pick and choose between on the Azurite armor, and it also provides some level of personalized character progression, and some of those traits are interesting and powerful, so there's your powerful rewards. But filling the place of 3 different systems is a lot to ask for Azurite armor. Sure, it can provide some of the same gameplay, but I don't think it's quite on the same scale. So my main question here is the Azurite armor system good enough? Let's quickly go through how Azurite armor works now that everything should be set in stone. We get our new artifact, the Heart of Azeroth, right as the expansion starts. To power up the amulet we need to collect Azurite, or artifact power, through our adventures to max level and beyond. When you obtain a piece of Azurite armor, the traits on it will be locked behind certain levels. Those levels refer to your amulet, so you need to get enough artifact power to get your amulet up to level 7 to unlock some level 7 traits. Easy peasy. As you obtain higher item level Azurite armor, the levels required to unlock each trait get higher and higher, but so does the effectiveness of the trait. The damage, healing, or any other numerical bonus that comes from your traits scales with item level, so the higher your piece of gear, the better the traits will be. That's the general gist of it. Azurite armor is specifically locked to head, shoulder and chest equipment slots, so you can have a max of 3 pieces at any one time, and the traits that each piece of armor provides is actually locked in as well. It's not like the Netherlight Crucible, where no matter what relic you looted, the Netherlight Crucible just throws random traits at you. A head slot piece of gear which you loot from a certain boss from a specific dungeon will always have the same traits, no matter how many times you loot it or what item level you get it at. A different head slot from a different boss will have different traits, but again that piece of gear won't change either. You can also look at what traits each piece of gear will provide from the dungeon journal, so you can hunt around for very specific bonuses if they're either more powerful than the others or they complement your build very well. This means you can actively pursue the pieces of Azurite armor that have the traits you want from dungeons and raids. You can also preview the different bonuses and traits on gear you don't have access to yet to see what lies in store. You'll start out with just 3 rings of traits, and when you start filling in your slots with epic gear, you'll start to see 4 rings of traits. The traits follow a standard pattern, no matter what piece of gear you have. The outermost ring has 1 trait, plus an extra trait for each spec your class has. The first one is pretty general, which always reflects where you got the piece of gear. On blue gear, the second ring has 2 traits, which are usually small passive effects. This is where you can find things like the new Prydaz, which is a teeny bubble compared to its former glory, and then the middle is always plus 5 item level. On epic gear, you have an extra ring, which has 3 traits, 1 for each role your class can fulfill. Now, just because they're supposed to be for DPS, tanks or heals doesn't mean you have to follow that rule exactly. I'm excited to see which traits can overlap really well with specs and roles. Who knows, a healing trait might be awesomely overpowered for certain tanks. Now, before we go any further, because I'm sure it's already crossed your mind while I've been talking, Azerite armor cannot Titan Forge or Warforge at all, ever. Item level increases the potency of the Azerite powers quite significantly, so it makes sense for that item level to be fixed in place. Can you imagine how crazy some people would get if Azerite armor could Titan Forge up to the cap? That would cause huge power gaps between lucky and unlucky players, though it's not like that's anything new at this point. So the item level of Azerite armor is static: 340 for mythic dungeons, 355 for normal raids, 370 for heroic raids, and 385 for mythic raids. You can get 355, 370, and 385 pieces of Azerite armor from your weekly mythic plus cache if you complete a key high enough. So everyone has access to the same item level of Azerite armor, whether you're doing raids or sticking to just dungeons. That creates a lot of stability in the system overall, which is really nice to see. So what kind of traits do we have access to? We're losing set bonuses, legendary effects, active artifact abilities, and quite a few passive effects. How many of those will the new Azerite armor powers replace? I'd say it's somewhere between minor set bonuses and watered down legendary effects, which doesn't really sound all that great when I say it like that, but there is quite a variety here. Some effects are just copy pasted from legendaries, but their numbers are significantly lower. The little bubble every 30 seconds is a great example. Nowhere near as impactful as Pride as itself, but the effect remains the same. This inner ring seems to have mostly passive effects. There's one to increase run speed, one which heals you whenever you take damage, one which heals you when you're not in combat, one which heals you and grants you some speed when an enemy dies. Lots of little things that won't necessarily make a huge difference, but might add up over the duration of a long encounter or full dungeon run. There's also some class-specific traits like Divine Shield granting a small absorb to nearby allies, or Divine Steed granting extra movement speed to your entire group. Some other quick examples of the class-specific traits include Mage Shields absorbing more damage, Cloak of Shadows healing you for a little bit, and Priest Dispel Magic healing themselves and 4 allies. The outermost ring has more specific traits. You'll find things like Rezan's Fury, which is on all Azerite pieces that come from Zuldazar, which summons a little raptor that attacks your enemies, and Trade Winds, which is on all gear that comes from Tiragard Sound, which increases your mastery for 15 seconds, and when it expires you grant a nearby ally mastery for 8 seconds. They're pretty unique and quirky effects. I think it's really cool that they reflect where the piece of gear comes from. It looks like each raid will also have special traits which provide some extra bonuses while you're inside the raid. As an example, Uldir gear comes with special traits like Archive of the Titans, which increases your primary stat while in combat and grants you Reorigination Array while you're inside Uldir. That extra bonus increases your stats further while inside Uldir, and it looks like the effects will stack as the weeks go by. That should mean that the raid will become easier as more people get Uldir Azerite gear and as the raid gets older. I'm really excited to see what kind of effects each raid will end up having. The other traits on this row are fairly typical numerical increases in one form or another. Some provide extra effects like bonus armor and thorns for tanks, bonus damage when you use certain abilities, buffs that stack from using specific abilities, or using abilities reduces the cooldown on other abilities. Honestly, these are quite heavily varied, which is definitely a good thing. If the trait was a simple damage increase to your main filler for every spec across the board, that would be very dull indeed. The extra ring that you get on epic gear seems to have less varied traits that don't usually affect specific abilities, but provide more general bonuses and buffs and are typically stronger. Overwhelming Power gives you stacks of haste which depreciate over time, there's simple ones which provide dodge every time you take damage, a mini version of Mage's Encounters Flow which provides intellect, and there's even one to provide you with an extra execute. Because these traits are tied to role as opposed to spec or class, you're going to see much more overlap between classes and what traits are made available. And when you have a class that can tank, DPS and heal, they'll have significantly less choices for straight DPS traits when compared to a class which has 3 DPS specs. There's still a variety here in the way each trait works, but everyone should have access to the same pools of traits for the most part. I know a few are tied specifically to spec abilities, but on this ring they're definitely few and far between. And if you were ever worried that your decisions couldn't be undone, you can now find Azerite Reforgers in your faction hub, which can reset the trait on any piece of Azerite gear for a sum of gold. It starts at 5 gold and doubles every time after that. The price will slowly decay over time if you don't reforge any pieces, so don't worry about it getting absurdly expensive. So, are Azerite armor powers and traits good enough to replace the systems that we've lost? Maybe not quite, but I think they're doing a pretty good job so far considering it's only 3 pieces of gear. I think the variety of traits is definitely there, we have plenty of choice, and the artifact power requirement to unlock higher level item Azurite traits is definitely going to keep us busy with the Amulet, but I'm not convinced that these traits will ever provide the power spikes that we got from legendaries. That's probably the largest hole that's going to be left from Legion to Battle for Azeroth, which might not actually be a bad thing. Right now a lot of traits are a nice bonus. Whenever you come across a higher item level piece of Azurite armor, more often than not you're going to replace your older piece regardless of traits because the higher item level is more desirable. Ideal or perfect traits are going to be more of a side grade type dealio as opposed to an absolute requirement. That's probably a good thing. I definitely wouldn't want to get stuck with a normal raid piece of loot because I still haven't gotten my perfect traits on a higher item level piece of gear. With that being said, we're all going to hit a gear plateau eventually. At that point the trait will make a difference, however small it may end up being. So I would fully expect a lot of players to run around with a bag full of Azurite armor to swap between different traits and different setups for different raid bosses, different dungeons, and anything else you can think of. That's probably going to be really important for Mythic Plus, especially higher keys, because your gear is locked in for the entire dungeon. I'm actually really excited to play around with different setups for different situations. That might be the best part of the Azurite armor system. The variety available to us allows us to chop and change various powers and bonuses to help with single target damage, AoE damage, survivability, mobility, damage mitigation, you name it. Some classes might use different traits because each class has different weaknesses and strengths. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. The only problem I have left with Azurite powers is that so many of them are pretty boring. The interactivity between abilities isn't always there, the exciting power spikes aren't really there, meaningful changes to rotation aren't really there. They're just small bonuses, which at the end of the day will be a minor increase to our overall numbers. There's 1 or 2 traits which break the mold and are a little more fun, but for the vast majority of these powers, they're just a little bit boring. The fun part for me is going to come from the puzzle of slotting various traits and powers together to see what the best setup is for different situations. If that kind of thing isn't exciting to you, Azurite armor might seem quite dull. With all that being said, I'm really excited to see what happens with Azurite armor from future dungeons and raids. Even though we're knocking on the door of Battle for Azeroth, I'm really curious to see where the system will end up by the time BFA comes to a close. Will this be a system which gets scrapped going into the next expansion, or will it be one of the systems which withstands the test of time and becomes a staple in World of Warcraft for years to come, just like Mythic Plus? Only time will tell. What do you think of the Azurite power system so far? Do you think they should be more powerful, more numerous, or maybe even more random? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you want to hop on that train, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.